Chapter 23, The Gilded Age, Part 2. Introduction. In this lecture, you will acquire a more nuanced understanding of the reality of how power was manipulated in the Gilded Age. You will learn the insider secrets of the robber barons, learn how they justified their wealth, how their big, monopolistic enterprises affected and influenced the economic prosperity of millions of people, how they stayed on top in their fiercely competitive world. You will learn why the business achievements of the Gilded Age, especially in the railroad business, were almost by definition big scale. Success, it turned out, required, however, more than just a brazenly expectant attitude. There were 4 reasons why the railroad barons, for instance, succeeded so impressively, and they were, and they are, the same 4 reasons why any big business has ever succeeded, from building continent-spanning railroads in the Gilded Age to building Walmart-sized businesses in our age. Without these 4 ingredients, no business makes the big time. You will learn what those ingredients are. And if your goal is to not only get big, but to create a monopoly as well and shut out the competition, the robber barons invented 2 ways to get that done too, and both were phenomenally successful. You will learn what they were. You will also learn about the importance of religion in the Gilded Age. People were more religious back then, and since wealthy people were as suspect for the shaky morals of their brawling business practices as they were admired for their business achievements, every robber baron of note made sure that everybody knew his riches came from God. And he had the theological arguments from the most prestigious seminaries to prove it. He also had the most persuasive preachers from the most prestigious churches in town to proclaim this truth from their pulpits. And, if he were smart, he accumulated an impressive record of unstinting charity and generous philanthropy to show the rest of the world the purity of his heart and intentions. You will learn all about it. And who's to say, after all, that the intentions of the Gilded Age plutocrats were not, in fact, sincere? Cornelius Vanderbilt endowed Vanderbilt University. Andrew Carnegie built the Carnegie Libraries, hundreds of them, all across the country. Sure, they named their charitable giving after themselves. Wouldn't you? But the mega-wealth generators of the Gilded Age didn't stop there. The suffering of the unwashed, ill-paid masses, many of them helpless, vulnerable immigrants, and no small number of stunted children, as well, who toiled in their dirty, dangerous, smoky factories, also had to be justified. And justified it was, with the latest up-to-the-minute science and philosophy. What science and philosophy, you might be asking, could have possibly been used for this? Well, you'll find out, in depth and in detail, in this lecture. The astonishing thing is that so many people actually believed it, and continued believing it until conditions among the working people became so bad that nobody gave a damn anymore about science or philosophy, and we will get to all of that too. But with all the justifications of religion, science, and philosophy, the Gilded Age plutocrats were still not done solidifying and justifying their power. They still had that pesky United States Constitution standing inconveniently in their way much too often, in their opinion. They could, however, hire the best lawyers to persuade the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution in their favor when a conflict arose. How well did they accomplish this? It's all here in this lecture. At this point, you might be wondering, where is the voice of the people during all of this? Are their interests ever being served? Good question. The answer is that the voice of the people was mostly quiescent in the Gilded Age, for 2 reasons, and you will be surprised when you learn what those reasons were. You might even change your mind about the robber barons and become a fan, or at least a believer in the ways that they justified their wealth and their insatiable zest for monopoly control of the businesses they so ruthlessly built and commanded. And command them they did. They commanded judges and legislatures, too, as has already been mentioned. One of them proudly proclaimed that he knew representative government in America was alive and well, because the legislature was the best that his money could buy. And buying it had not come cheap. He might have added that contributions were a two-way street, too. If the rich and powerful did not buy the legislatures, the politicians would offer to be bribed by hitting the plutocrats up for campaign contributions. But what, you may be asking, about the famous Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890? Didn't that change anything? You'll find out in this lecture. Another thing you'll find out is how the Gilded Age played out in the post-Reconstruction South of Jim Crow. Was there a place for big business and large-scale monopolies in the South's sleepy, backward agrarian world? You'll learn all about it. You will also find out what was happening with the emerging labor union movement during the Gilded Age. You already know that most prosperous Americans in this time, not just the robber barons, were opposed to any interruption to their prosperity for any reason, and you know that in the early years of the Gilded Age, most people of means thought of labor unions as troublemakers at best and anarchists and communists at worst. Yet labor unions gradually overcame their anarchist and revolutionary images, and workers signed up by the millions. You will learn what caused this sea change of perception of the labor union's role in the workplace. Labor unions eventually became so popular, in fact, that they became specialized. A half-dozen unions might be present on the same factory floor, a different union for each group of industrial specialists working in the same factory. This renaissance in the fortunes of the labor unions was a clear threat to the power the robber barons had over their workforce. You will learn how they tried to get back control over their employees. No matter what the robber barons did, however, the rise of the labor unions signaled the beginning of the end of their reign, and indeed of the Gilded Age itself. You will discover why it could not have been otherwise. It wasn't long thereafter before a new sheriff rode into town, President Teddy Roosevelt, and after him Woodrow Wilson, proud progressives both, one a Republican, the other a Democrat, both singing a new populist ditty, which was, to hear the plutocrats tell it, the funeral dirge of everything gilded in the Gilded Age. You will learn why they thought that. Then you can decide for yourself if the Gilded Age was a chapter in our history that Americans should admire and try to emulate, or if it's better to just be glad that it enjoyed a dignified burial in your history book. Or, even more interesting, can you make the case that the Gilded Age only changed its address and became less ostentatious? You will learn the surprising reason why a plutocracy is always a necessary part of a capitalist economy. Would we be enjoying the benefits of today's consumer age if we had not had first a Gilded Age and an industrial age before that? Say what you will about the robber barons, they were the closest thing to royalty that the American capitalist system ever produced. After studying this two-part lecture on the Gilded Age, you will know enough to actually start writing a cost-benefit analysis of the Gilded Age to determine how much the American public benefited from it in the short as well as the long run. That would be a very interesting project.